Welcome to Fearless Females, where ambition meets resilience. Meet your guide, Lorie Jones, president of Fidelis Wealth Advisors. Join her and remarkable women executives as they uncover the triumphs and transformative moments shaping extraordinary careers. Ready to be fearless? Let the journey begin.
Good morning, Fearless Females. Thank you so much for coming today. I would once again like to thank our sponsor, Fearless Financial Advisors. So I'm so excited to be debuting the new brand with a little bit of pink in my branding, and I'm super excited about that. So stop by fearlessfinancialadvisors.com and just check us out, set up an appointment, ask a question, see if you can get me to talk about Roth for less than 45 minutes at any given time. I promise I won't do that. So today we have Irene Barnett. And you guys, some of you know that I am a traveler. I love traveling. I like going different places. It's an adventure for me. It's so much fun. But if I am traveling, I do travel like I do life, like I do my job. I have a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet is like filled with an inch of its life. It is color coded. I've got like every single solitary place I'm going to stop and where we're staying and what we're doing that day. My kids, if they're traveling with me, get copies in triplicate. It is an adventure. And don't let any of the children tell you differently, because they've always traveled this way. Their spouses are getting quite an eye-opening experience as they start traveling with me in my spreadsheets. Irene shows up and she has one night planned, her first night and her last night. She says she has planned, and the rest of the time she's winging it. Guys, this is giving me anxiety. I am hyperventilating right now over this whole travel thing. But I will tell you that the most important thing that she said is, she says, I always show up unapologetically myself. And she said, as women, kind of, we often think that we have to navigate male-dominated industries by pretending to be something that we're not. And she says she learned that lesson early on, and she is unapologetically who she is, very authentic to her very bones. And I love this interview. I really found some inspiration with Irene, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's get started. Good morning. So we're here today with Irene Barnett. She is a senior business consultant, and I'm so excited to listen to what you do, Irene, and have this conversation with you. I'm thrilled about your journey. You say all the right words. As geeks and nerds who are so interested in maybe the people side and building the business and making things a little more efficient. I love that.
Great. Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
So my first question is always the same. I'm a reader. I love reading. I can't think of a book I haven't liked. What is your favorite book?
I have way too many to go into at this time because with you, I love to read, but I always go back to this one book that I have read. I'm not sure how many times over the decades, honestly, since I first read it. And that's Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
Uh-huh.
My background is in writing, actually, and film production, strangely. So big morphing happens there. And she's a phenomenal writer, a wonderful writer. But the book is about creativity and her journey with creativity. And one of the things, and the title kind of speaks to in it, is this idea that in creative endeavors or anywhere really in our life, when we feel overwhelmed, we just need to take things one thing at a time and look at the smaller picture sometimes in order to achieve the bigger goal. So Bird by Bird refers to her brother, when they were little, had to do a paper for school about something like all the birds of Northern America. Do a report on the birds of Northern America. And he was completely overwhelmed by the idea of, well, there's just a gazillion birds that I could write about and everything. And she heard her father, who was also a writer, by the way, tell him, just take it bird by bird.
Uh-huh.
And so that you can just sort of bring it down to these smaller bite-sized chunks. And I used that thinking in writing. a ton, because that can be very overwhelming, but also just throughout life when things feel like it's too big of a thing, just bring it down to these like manageable pieces.
Yeah.
So, and it's also a very funny, incredibly vulnerable and heartfelt book, and she's just a beautiful writer, and it's really, really one of my favorites. My other favorite that I have read over again, it makes me laugh because I was going through and listening to some of your previous podcasts. Another one of your guests said On Writing by Stephen King. Another remarkable book just about somebody's creative process, and how he kind of overcame a lot of stuff to become the writer that he is. Another one that I have read a couple times over the years. Those two
I
are
love that.
my
I
favorites.
like the second recommendation for a book that I already, that was already on my list.
Oh, yes.
I go through and like order all of them at once, and they come and they get in this stack, and then I kind of go through them, and then I'm ready for another batch. So I kind of feel a little selfish because this book list it should be titled Lorie's books that she wants to read, and I only want to read the good ones. So I ask everyone what their favorite is.
Yeah. That's the way to do it. It's like Christmas. Every time you get a batch of books, too. It always feels like it's Christmas morning.
Yeah. It's so great. Well, that sounds really interesting. And it kind of sounds like a little bit of a like be present in the moment kind of thing. Like focus on one thing, focus on the thing that's happening now or the little pieces. And then eventually you'll be able to make the whole. But I do know that in life, if you start looking at like all the many, many things that you have to do and the many roles that you have to fulfill, it gets overwhelming and you just don't even want to try anything.
Absolutely. And to your point, that keeps you from being present in the journey because you just keep looking at the end of the journey. You're not looking at how to get there and what's happening along the way. And that you can miss so much and so many opportunities that, you think you have an endpoint that's down the road there, but that can be very limiting. And if that's all you're looking at, you're not seeing all these other possible sidetracks that you'd be going on that could take you in a different direction.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it sounds like your journey has been a little bit of a winding path.
Oh my gosh, so much.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, Irene. Tell me how you got started on your journey. What do you do now? Like, just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I gotta say out of the gate, I have never had a grand plan. That is not how I operate in life. It's not how I travel. It's not how I just am, I kind of look at my life the way I do like to do international travel. It's like I kind of know where I'm going to land and where I'll stay the first night. And I know where I'm leaving from and where I'm staying the night before I leave. Then I have a very, very loose plan between those two dates.
Like you don't have motel rooms booked. You're giving me anxiety.
I know. See, it doesn't work for everybody. I'm not necessarily saying this is the end all, but what I have found in all my years of traveling kind of applies to how I have actually lived my life. It's sort of funny in that I do have a general idea of direction, a general idea of what I think I want, but I personally have always felt like the missed train or, the deciding to stay in some small village longer has always had the biggest rewards for me. And I honestly, my career has kind of followed a similar track that I'm just always very open to other opportunities that I may not be thinking about because I'm not paying attention. And so very quickly, because I've kind of been doing this for a really long time. But I started out wanting to be in film production, love film, love the writing of film, love it. It's my favorite, probably art form, I think. So that's what I studied, and that's what I did for probably the first 10 years out of college, in a variety of ways. A little bit of film, a little bit of television, music videos. Just everything you think of. You kind of really pay dues for quite a while in the film industry, just pulling cable and doing all sorts of things. And so I did that for about 10 years when I kind of had a realization that it just wasn't a kind of a spiritual fit for me. I loved the art form, but I wasn't nuts about the business and the lifestyle and the culture of the creation of that particular art form. So honestly, I just needed to, kind of find a different job, honestly. Okay. It was really just, at the very beginning, I was much younger too, so I didn't have a lot of responsibilities and everything. So you could kind of experiment a little bit. And I had done a couple of like extra little jobs here and there between shoots, for instance, where I would do sort of desktop publishing sort of work, just really
Okay.
simplistic stuff. Well, I ended up moving to Seattle, Washington, and I got on at Microsoft as a desktop publisher, and it launched a whole career in tech
Oh,
that
wow.
I never would have thought that I would either enjoy or be good at, and it turned out that both of those things were true. That I
Mhm.
sort of had a natural affinity for tech and could learn and pick up everything that I needed to very quickly. Had no idea that I had that skill set at
Yeah.
all, and that I enjoyed it. So it's that kind of launched where I am today, really.
Uh,
From working at Microsoft as an employee early on, after that, I actually left and started my own consulting business, with Microsoft being my main client.
uh-huh.
And it just grew and expanded from there to where I am today, which is I am a business consultant that focuses on the people side of business, like I had mentioned. It's organizational effectiveness and change management, learning and development, and all the stuff that makes the humans in an organization ready for whatever the business is throwing at them. Either a big change or transformation that might be happening, leadership change. There's a lot of leadership coaching in what I do as well. And it just honestly morphed into that
I
as
love that.
I just kept doing it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it kind of an interesting journey in that I stumbled upon it in some ways and it just turned out great.
Well, it's interesting though, because it feels like you were open to those kind of things coming into your life, the same way you're open to traveling and having those
Yes.
experiences come into your life. I bet you have very few regrets about not trying something because you seem very open to, you know, taking a new path.
Yeah, I would say in general, my kind of philosophy has always been that I don't really think that I have regrets, nor do I feel like I've made huge mistakes. I kind of don't look at it that way. I certainly have moments of, oh, I wonder if I had chosen A instead of B, I wonder where I'd be today. But I don't know
Mhm.
that I would call that a regret. And the same with mistakes. For sure. I kind of feel like we make choices based on the toolkit we have at that moment in time. And as long as your heart's in the right place, sure, maybe the outcome isn't exactly what you would want it to be, but I don't know that I would call it a mistake. It all kind of adds to the learning, you
Learning
know?
experience. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting too that that sounds like you were in tech as a woman in the
Mhm.
early days of tech and
Yes.
like when they were doing the coding and like they were bringing these
Mhm.
big companies that turned into behemoths and you were there kind
Yes.
of at the ground floor.
True. Yes. And it was very interesting. And I think that is kind of funny walking into it. Let me just really just tripping into this career at a particular time in that industry at a particular company, this, Microsoft.
Yeah.
I didn't have expectations of any particular thing, right? So I look back at it and yeah, it was interesting. And certainly as a woman, it was sort of interesting, but I didn't have any expectations going in. So I don't know that I can say that it was a struggle necessarily. I mean, I had things. I mean, I don't know that there's a woman alive that hasn't come across something that was uncomfortable or just unfortunate
Yeah.
in a business setting. But yeah, I do think that the lack of expectation set me up to potentially have in some ways, maybe a better experience.
Yeah. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about the best investment you've made in yourself along your professional journey. Is there something that you can point to and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that because if I didn't, I just wouldn't be where I'm at today?
Oh, absolutely. And that would be leaving Microsoft.
Uh-huh.
That was a huge investment and a big risk because I made the choice to leave for a couple of reasons. It was way back, like to your point, early on with Microsoft, and there was a big shift happening with Bill Gates kind of backing off of his daily, work there, and some of that a lot that leadership being handed over to other people. And I kind of saw the company changing a little bit, and thought this would be a good time to to try something new. And somebody at Microsoft had said, if you went and started your own consulting or your own vendor kind of work, I would hire you tomorrow to help me with these projects. And
Mhm.
I went, okay, well, let's give it 6 months. I'm going to go ahead and leave Microsoft. This was before kids and before a lot of responsibility. I'm going to leave Microsoft and I'm going to give this a try for 6 months and see what happens. And I did my budget spreadsheet and I'm like, okay, here's the worst case scenario. I'm making very little money and how do I get by? And kind of had a plan in place for that, sort of a risk and mitigation plan, if you will, and left. And then 12 years later, I was still going strong and
Mhm.
made way more money than I anticipated and was constantly busy and expanded and brought other people in to help me. And so that was a bit of a leap of faith.
Mhm.
And I am absolutely thrilled that I took that risk because otherwise, yeah, there's no way that I would be where I am today in having built other firms up and
Mhm.
work in leadership within other consulting firms as well. Having run it myself, I can go in not just as a consultant, but as somebody who has kind of seen how the sausage is made. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I understand all the layers that need to be considered when
Yeah.
doing stuff in business. Yeah.
Yeah. What gave you the courage? Was it the spreadsheet that said, "Oh, worst case scenario isn't so bad"? Was it the confidence of the person who's like, "I'd hire you the next minute"? Like, how did you get that that courage to take the step?
I want to say there's an element of just pure stupidity that just decided just kind of went, what's the worst that can happen? I mean, I've not ever been a very risk averse person. I actually am. I become the older I get, obviously, the more risk averse I do get
Mhm.
in some ways, which I never thought would be me, but maybe it's just a thing that you can't control. I don't
Yeah.
know. But at that time in particular, I get a lot of energy out of taking a little bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And I know that's not true for everybody, but for my personality, that definitely has been part of it and the background in film production and like you don't know what's your next shoot going to be and so I was sort of used to a little uncertainty
Mhm.
and so I think that played very heavily in me making that decision but absolutely from just a pragmatic perspective having somebody say you're starting this business and I will actually hire you immediately so I went into this with a client
Uh-huh.
so that definitely makes you feel a little bit better because you go, well, worst case scenario is that this person just hires me and this is all that we're doing. And I know exactly what my billable rate will be. So you really kind of know. But then what happened in that 6 months is by the time that 6 months was up, I had 8 subcontractors that were partnering with me. And we had been then, I had been introduced to a bunch of other people who wanted to hire us to do work. And it just took off. It was crazy. It was sort of the heyday of
Mhm.
vendors and consultants at Microsoft, honestly. It was when little old me could get a master contract at Microsoft. That no longer would ever be possible.
Now
So,
they've got infrastructure around that sort of stuff,
well,
huh?
they got dinged pretty badly around, from the federal government and taxes and everything else to make sure that they associated or worked with vendors and consultants in a very specific way. This was kind of in the Wild West still.
Yeah. Yeah.
when anybody could work with them was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the timing also worked for that to work out well as also. So I didn't have to share, I didn't have to give a piece of the profits to some vendor company that was going to be my, billing turnstile or whatever. So
Mhm. That's
yeah.
kinda cool. That's and you do find those industry and, like, no matter what profession you're in, you find those startup industries where it feels like Bitcoin kind of feels like the wild, wild west right now in
Right.
finance, right? Where you're like
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's before regulations get in there, you can
yeah,
kind of slip in and get a foothold. Yeah.
yeah. What about the worst advice someone gave you? Can you think of a time when someone gave you really bad advice, and did you take the advice or did you go ahead and leave it?
I'm not very good at taking advice in general. So I will say that the only, I don't know that I've really gotten bad advice from anyone. Again, I don't necessarily go after advice. Not that I'm a, I've gotten a lot of great advice. I would say that the only bad advice I've honestly ever gotten, and I actually went against it anyway, was from my dad. to be frank. He was not into the idea of me going to school to learn film production, or even before that, when I was in high school, I was really interested in going into theater and acting because I've just always been into the arts, were always like a big deal in my life. And he really just was thoroughly against me going into any kind of an industry like that where it would be a struggle financially. And I mean, he's not incorrect at all. But when you're young, that's the time to do that, right? And sometimes you do hit pay dirt and it's not a struggle anymore. And sometimes you go, no, I think I'll go work at Microsoft as a desktop publisher. It just depends. So I would say that that's the worst advice I've ever gotten. And it's something that has actually really informed me as a parent with my kids to not poo-poo anything they want to do if it brings them joy.
So do you think even though you went to Microsoft and you left the film industry, the 10 years that you spent there, they filled your bucket, so to speak, or they were worth it? You don't wish them away.
No way. No, there's very little I wish away in my life. Honestly, very little. Whether it turned out well or not is beside the point almost in some ways. I think that what happened at that time, I did write a lot, which was very gratifying and really good. So I think the fact that I wrote for myself and I wrote a screenplay and I tried to go out there and hustle the screenplay and do all the things. That was a good experience to understand that. The area in film that I was kind of drawn towards was assistant directing. And really in a big way, that's sort of a PM for a set.
Oh, yeah.
So I did learn a lot of super good organizational kind of project managery stuff from doing that I could apply way outside of that industry.
That's so cool.
I think that I wouldn't say it filled my creative bucket. And that is what I needed to learn, I think, was that it isn't, while the output is very creative, a lot of the steps to get to that are not horribly creative. And I'm going to actually backtrack in having said that. And the reason is because I also believe that almost everything we do in life is creative. So I guess my understanding or my thinking about what that creative process was, I learned was not what I thought it was. But I also walked away understanding that I can apply that creativity anywhere. Just being a human is super creative, right? Yeah. So it did broaden my idea of what creativity is, I would say.
Cool. I find it interesting, though, that you left filmmaking and being in the film industry to find a more creative career in tech.
Kind of, isn't that crazy? But it's really true because the part of tech that I'm leaning into, you know what it is? It's creative because there's a huge amount of psychology also behind the area of tech that I work in, which is that people side of things. And that's really creative because every person is unique. Every organization is unique. Every specific situation that both the organization and the people find themselves in is completely unique. And I find that to be constantly intriguing and interesting. You have to rethink every single time what you're going to do, how you're going to work with these people, how you're going to get them where they need to be. And you're right, though. That's hugely creative.
Yeah.
It's really creative. So you're absolutely right. But that goes back to that point of it's creative anywhere you are, even in finance. It can be, it's
especially
really creative.
in finance. Finance is so much fun.
Yeah, see? It's true. I mean, of course, you can't get too creative with numbers. It depends on what you're working on. But, it's sort of just the way that you approach a problem or an issue or a set of circumstances. That's the creative part. It doesn't, you can think outside the box everywhere.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm drawn to those problem-solving, creative, organizational kind of maneuvers that sort of work around, again, with my piece, it's the people piece as well. So I'm working on client satisfaction and trying to create an experience for them that feels comfortable inside of finance. And a lot of times finance is not considered fun as I think it is. So,
well, yes and no. I mean, I know a lot of people who think finance is a real kick. So I get it. Yeah.
They're my besties, those ones.
Yeah, exactly.
What about, I know that you said you don't have regrets, and I understand that. I actually, look at most things that I've done as like learning experiences too,
Yeah.
but I would say that there are times in my life where I would like, if I knew then the same
Mhm.
things that I know now, and I could redo that situation somehow, I would definitely do it differently. Do you have something like that?
I do. I don't know that I would redo it differently only because of the outcomes. But I do have one of those, sliding door moments where I made a choice to not do something and do something else instead. And I do go back to that choice. So I had an opportunity to move to Dublin, Ireland, to work with Microsoft to help them set up this is again years ago, but their European office for localization and translation for all of their products and everything. And that is in Dublin. And I had an offer to go with my then boss with her to Dublin to help set this thing up. At the time, I happened to have just met this man and we ended up getting married and having a couple of kids. And I didn't go because that relationship was just starting. And I knew that that would probably not survive a move like that.
Mhm.
So I do sometimes wonder now, lo these many years later, whether or not, what my life would look like had I taken that path.
Mhm.
I don't, in a million years, would never say I regret that choice. I
Mhm.
have two of the most remarkable sons on the planet, and there's not a thing I would change. Absolutely. But that would be that one sort of, fork in the road
Yeah.
that I do look back at now and then. But again, I also think that even at that age when I was building my career, I still had an innate understanding, and I think of it now, I didn't think of it at the time, of balance and how
Mhm.
important my personal life was.
Mhm.
And that I knew I needed to have both of those things fed. I couldn't do one or the other. And I think I knew that like deep down inside. And that was part of the choice that I made. And I'm glad that I did that. I'm glad that I did that because it did set a tone for me to balance that ongoing in my life.
That's really, I struggle with balance,
Everybody does, man.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone does, but I should be better than that now, but I'm still not. And I wonder if that's so interesting thinking back on that turning point or that pivotal point and realizing that you made a choice that brought you more balance
Yes. Yeah.
rather than maybe a choice that in the long run would have been very lucrative and
Hmm.
or you would have been much further ahead than you are today, but you made a choice that was better for your life as a whole.
Yeah. And I don't know if I would be better or further along than I am today. I think it would just be different.
Different.
Yeah. I don't think that I would have been more successful necessarily. I think I'd be successful in a different way.
So you made a choice maybe that was right for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I do think, I wonder because I have thought about this quite a bit just because it's interesting to look back at things like that. But I also wonder that I have a sense that I need balance in my life. This has always been something that has jumped out at me all through my life. I'm a Libra. Maybe that's why. I don't know. And the scales have to be like exactly the same.
There you go.
I know, right? But I wonder, had I gone to Dublin, I suspect I would have made choices that would have created that balance under those circumstances as well.
Huh.
I don't think that because it just felt authentic to
That
who I
makes
am.
sense.
Yeah. I
Huh.
think, again, I just think it would have looked different,
It looked different.
but I don't know that it would have been better or worse.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but yeah, it is always interesting what the alternate reality. And I guess I always think, well, the alternate Lori would be worse off or better off or something like that. But what if the alternate Lori is exactly where she's meant to be? It's
Yep.
just different.
Yeah. Different surroundings. Maybe there's different people around you.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, who knows? But I don't think I would have been either better or worse.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What about, Irene, if you go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of your journey when you were just starting out, 20, 21, 22, do you have some advice for that young lady?
I do. And I thought about this because I've had a lot of really wonderful opportunities to mentor people along the way,
Hmm.
especially women. Not just women, though, men too. And I think that the number one thing that I would want to tell myself to feel confident about is the fact that, because I can see it now, it's because this is feedback I've gotten in my career all along, is that I think my greatest skill is showing up authentically to every interaction that I am in.
Hmm.
I honestly think that above and beyond understanding of technology, understanding of, the pro sci way of doing change management or any of these things, right, that I've accomplished, these skill sets that I have, way beyond that is that I show up to every interaction with coworkers or clients or anyone else that I'm interacting with the same, regardless of who they are. And
Hmm.
I always am just unapologetically myself. I don't think I understood when I was in my early 20s that actually had the value that it actually has.
Hmm.
I really don't think I understood that. So I think that I was running and chasing things that, knowledge or contacts or whatever it is. Not that those things aren't worth chasing, mind you, but I think I put way more weight on that being what was going to make me successful than the simple fact that people like to work with me.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't have known that in my 20s because you just haven't had enough runway under you
Yeah.
yet, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Those are things that you go aha at years later
Yeah.
when you have a whole proof of concept behind you on who you are and how you're showing up, right? So super easy to say that now. But if I could say that to myself then, I think that I would have enjoyed the ride a little bit more.
Hmm.
I really do.
I like that. There was something recently, I can't remember what, but organized chaos, like making organization
Mhm.
out of chaos. I always say that's my superpower is that I
Yeah.
can turn chaos into organization. And it never occurred to me that other people can't do that. Like that's
Right.
not their gift, that's not the thing that they love more than anything on earth.
Right.
And that doesn't sound like a super exciting thing to do, but for me it's a unique thing, and that idea of like talking to yourself and saying, hey, lean into those things that come naturally to you and that you're good at, that you're uniquely qualified to do, and show up there.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just that you're good at that, Lori. It's that you bring your special sauce to it. That's the thing. You bring your take, your personality, your enthusiasm, and that's only you. That's not anybody else in the world can do exactly what you do. Well, it's true of everybody. It really
Yeah.
is. And I
Yeah.
think understanding that it's so hard for us to hear those things, which is just sad in itself. I'm just going
Yeah.
to say we should be better. We should be much better to ourselves in this world.
Mhm.
But I think that it's not just that your outcomes are probably remarkable. Like you hit it, like you take that chaos, you make it structured, you make it something that people can work within, but it's how you do it, specifically how you do that. Other people can probably have the outcomes, but nobody can do it exactly the way that you do. And that's a big deal.
That feels so nice to me, and I'm not sure I can believe it fully yet. And
Oh,
that
no, it'll take time, but just keep working on it because that's when you get to the ripe old age of me, you might finally go, yeah, you know what? Dang it. Sure, I'm going to embrace that. Why not?
yeah. I could see why you would want to, why would you would want your younger self to know that
Oh,
earlier.
yeah.
If you
We
could.
need to be so much kinder to ourselves and we need to be give ourselves so much more grace.
Hmm.
So much more grace than we do. I do think that women are especially challenged with that. And that breaks my heart. I have throughout my life too. I mean, believe me, I didn't come out of the womb feeling confident. Doesn't exist. But I do think that it's something that women have to work a lot harder
Yeah.
at. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wish that sometimes I wish I could just like do a little tape recording of that, the book where she stands and she looks in the mirror and she says, "You is kind, you is
Oh,
beautiful."
yes,
Or,
yes. So that the little girl
yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
That is the
And
cutest thing
like,
ever.
just for every woman to just carry around that recorder. And when they're
It's
feeling
true.
not quite cool as they
Exactly.
really are, just,
It's
you know,
yes. It's
let me tell
exactly
you some
true.
cool things.
Yes.
What scared you the most at the beginning of your journey or during your career? And maybe it's nothing. You seem pretty fearless to me.
Well, fearless or dumb, stupid, just who knows, it's, that youthful ignorance. I embraced it probably more
Oh,
than
yeah.
I needed to. I would say that at the beginning, especially, since my particular career path was a lot more, being a consultant and having to kind of survive a bit on my wits and, business sense that I was learning along the way as I was doing it. It took quite a while. This is very common for many people who are trying to, be entrepreneurs or do something on their own. It's just that knowledge that financially it all works out. That takes time. And again, it's sort of that proof of concept that, oh, yeah, you're right. I had a really low month this month, but I had way too much the next month. And then at a certain point, you start to go, okay, I've seen now all the cycles of a couple of years of doing this. And I understand that when it's down or slow, I can actually enjoy that time
Mhm.
and not fret and freak out about whether or not it's dried up. That's it. I'm done. It was only a
Well, it was a
2-year
good 2-year
experiment. Or,
run.
that's all. Yeah, woo. Obviously not for me. I'm gonna have to go find a job. So that was my biggest stress, I think, in doing it. That I learned after a couple of years of having to see sort of that balance sheet up and going up and down. And I finally kind of realized that that's just the way that this sort of job works. This is just how it works. And then eventually was able to go, oh, look at me. I don't have anything for 2 weeks in February. I'm going to go on vacation. I'm going to go do something with that time. I'm not going to just sit here and stress out and get, all freaked out about stuff. So definitely, I think for me, the financial stress of it was the scariest part.
Mhm.
Just, is this really going to work? I always know I can go get a job if I have to. I'm never above that basic idea
Mhm.
of, hey, if I have to, I can be a barista. I mean, I'll make rent.
Yeah.
I have, so I've never been sort of the person who thought that anything was all that below me when it came to necessity like that.
Mhm.
And that was something else I kind of had to learn, was sort of like, yeah, what's the worst that can happen for real? What really is the worst that can happen?
Mhm.
And it isn't nearly as bad as you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably that your spreadsheet when you first started out and you did your little
Yes.
spreadsheet. You're like, okay, this is what I need to do. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, let's try it.
Exactly. And then we'll live in that reality until it's proven otherwise.
I have a client I think is hilarious. He always tells me, he's like, what I really want, Lorie, is rice and beans. I don't want to eat any bird food. I want rice and beans through the entire retirement. And I'm like, this, high net worth individual. He's like so far beyond rice and beans, but that is his worst
I know, but if you
scenario.
have that, right, you have that idea that that's the worst that can happen, is that
Yeah.
I love rice and beans. It's yummy and it's good for you. Okay, it's certainly not that bad.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll make it better from there. I like that
I,
idea.
I love that.
What about along your journey? Did you face any unique challenges because you were a woman?
Oh my goodness. I would say yes. I would say, I've come in throughout the years, I've had moments here and there of like I had one or two instances of men just not respecting me
Mhm.
as a manager. And really, and again, this was so long ago, I'm not even sure that I know that they wouldn't get away with now. They got away with then. And I found that frustrating, but always just tried to work through it. with them and figure it out. Only in one time did I have to like escalate that situation. And it was dealt with and it was what it was. And everybody moved on. But I'd say from a broader perspective, it was very hard. Again, kind of going back to that idea of balance. It was impossible to actually have good balance when I was a full-time working entrepreneur and had twins.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I know. And God laughs. I mean, I don't even know. And I had my kids quite late in life as well.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I think my husband and I tried to kind of say, this is going to be an equal partnership. This is how this is going to go. It's not going to be, I don't know if it's just general gender roles that we just kind of fall into.
Mm-hmm.
There's always that typical female thing is like, well, nobody else is going to do it. Therefore, I have to do it. Therefore, you kind of pile it on yourself as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to operate as a consultant, which was great in one way, in that I wasn't going into an office every day. I had a very flexible schedule. That was definitely very helpful. But then, doing time at school, helping with reading, doing all the, being present as a parent, just the physical toll of having, especially when they were like toddlers, having no transition time between work and parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And really, at the end of the day, somewhat being from the psychological or the emotional parenting perspective, being kind of primary on that level. And I don't mean to diss my ex-husband in any possible way, but it was a lot. And I did find that one day I kind of looked up and went, oh, our gender roles are pretty traditional right now. And other than the fact that I'm working full time.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes feel that way too. Like I do a full-time work and then I'm a full-time mom too. I'm like, how did I get my head in this?
Exactly right. And so I found that very challenging and incredibly depleting. And of course, our wellness goes completely to the side. It is non-existent. It's not a priority. So this is, not a unique story in the least. In fact, it's incredibly typical is my experience, and knowing all my friends and all the people who have been in the situation. That has always been a very specifically female problem, I think. I don't know. I don't have any answers on how that's supposed to get fixed.
Yeah, that was my next question. Is there anything that would have made that easier for you?
Just my specific circumstances are such that there wasn't a lot of leeway in changing that. I just don't think there was any. I did end up also staying in jobs or work that I would have under different circumstances not put up with or stayed, but I had to because, my husband was also an entrepreneur. So, it was just there was periods of time of feeling incredibly stuck in the situation that I was in, and kind of like, when is it my turn? When do I get to take a risk and do something new or different? And that time kind of never came, So that really was the biggest challenge I think that I've had as a woman and a parent and a businesswoman and all the things, right? I have an incredibly close relationship with my kids. They're both 22 years old now and in college.
Yeah.
And we're incredibly close. And they see this woman who has juggled all these. I mean, they have a front row seat to be the best feminists on the planet, the best allies. And they absolutely are. And and I look at them and their generation and everything now and other people, coming up. And I hope that those sorts of they won't go away. I mean, these are just parts of life to some extent, but I do think there's there will continue to be a vast improvement in that scenario from that home life.
Yeah, I've got kids that age too as well. Mine are 26 to 18. And I watch as they start their own relationships and the roles that they take on and the roles that they don't take on. And it seems to be a little bit more cooperative. It's as far as that goes. And I will be so fascinated and interested in watching my daughter-in-laws navigate that piece, because I remember those years. I almost cry for you as I think of those
Yeah.
deep exhaustion and
Oh,
make cupcakes for school tomorrow or something along those lines. Just want to go
absolutely.
give every woman in the world a hug and tell her, honey, you are doing great.
Yes. I also think another piece of that is simply the fact that we talk about this stuff now. Like,
Mhm.
it's okay to put your hand up and go, this doesn't feel fair, or this doesn't feel, this doesn't feel good for me. I need a break. I feel like there's a lot more open dialogue amongst women too about what the reality of parenting is.
Mhm.
I think that back in the olden days, I don't know that people wanted to talk about the fact that, hey, I have days where I absolutely hate being a parent.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I had kids. I mean, listen, and you know what?
I would sell them on
You
the corner.
Totally. I mean, come on. I am with you. I have had those days like crazy. And I do think that that dialogue and that being okay to talk about
Mhm.
is way more acceptable now
Yeah.
than it was even 20 years ago when I was doing it.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah, there are days when I just remember my husband coming home, and I delayed my career and stayed home with my kids, during the first 10 or 15 years. And I just remember him showing up at the door after work, and I would be like, I can't, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And
Tapped out. I'm taking a knee. I
yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, from the different interviews that I've done, and as I started my working career, I do remember having kids where I would take my older kids out of school to watch my younger kids because they were sick and I couldn't get out of, I couldn't
Yeah.
not go to work. Just wasn't, it would have been bad.
Yeah. No, I know. And I just don't, men just don't have that same, don't have that same experience.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't. So, well, what, Irene, is the thing that you are most proud of?
Honestly, it's those boys. It's my kids. It really is. It really is. It's another thing. I'm not going to say I stumbled into being a parent because that sounds just irresponsible. But but I certainly wasn't expecting twins. I will say that right
Oh,
off.
yeah.
That was a total surprise. But I do think I'm very proud of them as humans. I think they're just remarkable men. I think that I'm very proud that I'm adding some remarkable men to the world. I think that we need a lot of that right now, and I'm happy to contribute somebody, some good ones. But I think that being that mother, that businesswoman, the person who leaned in, who got it done, all while being able to make sure that they understood that they were always the priority,
Mhm.
has created in them this understanding of their privilege of being a couple of white males in this
Yeah.
society. They're very aware of their privilege from that perspective, but also so that they can see, I don't know, kind of how fierce women are.
Mm.
Honestly, I think as difficult as those years were, where you did want to just give your children away, they see all of that from a very young age. They're taking all that in.
Mhm.
And I think it has formed how they look at women. And I think it has formed them into these incredibly empathetic and respectful men. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of them. That definitely trumps everything else.
I love that because I often think of my daughters and looking up and seeing how I try to show up and what I try to put out in this world, and
Yeah.
helping them to be the best that they can be. But I too have, sons, and my three oldest are boys, and watching how they have treated the women in their life
Yes.
and how they are encouraging and helping them to grow and develop. It's
It's huge.
it's
That is
huge.
not a small thing. It's bigger
No.
than anything we could possibly do, honestly. It's amazing. Yeah.
If you were talking to someone who is starting down this path that you're already so successful at, and it's a little bit of a winding path, a little different
It's definitely.
twists and turns, new
Yes.
adventures. But what
Yes.
would you tell her, someone who was just starting, to help her be as successful as you are?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one is kind of going back to that showing up authentically as yourself, right? I think especially in business, especially if you're in a male-dominated industry, I think, and I've seen it a ton with a lot of different women, very successful women and women who are starting out, the whole spectrum. I have been in conference rooms where I was the only woman amongst a dozen men more times than not in my career. And I have seen other women in similar situations show up under those circumstances. And I've seen a lot of different ways that they do that. So one thing that, so it's piggybacking off of that conversation around authenticity and being just who you are, no matter who is in the room. So whether this is a boardroom and we have a bunch of CEOs and CTOs and C-level C-suite people sitting around in the room, or whether or not you're sitting with a project team and you're just trying to work out some problem. I don't ever show up or talk differently, regardless of who is sitting at that table. That I think is incredibly important, because what I've seen over the years often is that women will show up in those circumstances trying to be a man. They're not showing up as just a strong, smart, capable, and successful woman. They're showing up trying to equate, kind of to relate to the men on their level, rather than just standing in who they are and showing up confidently, or at least pretending. Fake it till you make it.
I know.
I mean, even if you don't feel confident, try to show up confidently. So you don't have to navigate that male-dominated environment you don't have to navigate it as anything other than who you are. That is going to be your best chance at success. It really is. Because when you show up as somebody else, it might, maybe, and maybe not, but it might work for that particular moment in time, but it's not going to be a sustainable thing, and it will not work long-term.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's one. In telling a young person who's starting out in business to be confident is an absurd thing to ask of anybody. It takes years to build confidence.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily realistic. But I do think that trying really hard to just be yourself is really important. I think the other piece, and again, it's kind of going back to that, giving yourself a lot of grace in certain situations. Know that you are going to have missteps. You're going to say the wrong thing, or you're not going to show up prepared, or whatever it is. And owning those things is really, really important, because that's how you grow. It's how you show up with humility, and you show up with, there was a quote that I absolutely love by Dan Harris that I literally just saw this morning. And I was like, oh, I've got to mention this to you because I thought you'd like it. It says, don't be afraid to be wrong. If you're not being humbled regularly, you're probably not paying attention. And I really like that, because especially at the beginning, well, through our whole life, it's not even just in the beginning. We're constantly having missteps. Everybody is. And anybody who says otherwise is absolutely lying and probably doing the worst job of all of us. I just feel like, know that you're going to not do your best or not be your best on certain days. And it's okay. It's okay. It's a part of the fabric. Don't be too hard on yourself.
I like that idea. I've got a team of young ladies here, and I'm mentoring them and bringing them up to enter the finance realm. So there'll be more finance, women in finance.
Lovely. Fantastic.
I know. But that's one thing that I'm like, there's probably not anything you can do that I can't fix.
Right. Exactly.
I can't think of a thing. I said, if there is one thing that you can do that I can't fix, I will let you know. Don't do that thing. Otherwise, we can probably fix it.
Yes, exactly. We catastrophize everything.
Yeah.
And we get inside our own head, and whatever it is we did or said feels 1,000 times worse than it actually is. And there's half the time, I bet you people didn't even notice. that it happened, right?
Yeah.
We're not as important as we think we are to the outside world.
That is A1.
And that can be a liberating thing to realize.
Yeah, you probably didn't even notice. Yeah, exactly.
Totally. I mean, the number of times where after a meeting or something, when I was internally incredibly frustrated, let's say, and then I get out of the meeting and I turn to somebody, I'll go, did I sound just completely rude in there? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh, see, I felt like I was being really rude because I was so frustrated, but I was all about internally what I was thinking and feeling. They're like, you're crazy. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know what.
I know. We do that to ourselves all the time. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, thank you, Irene, so much for talking about your journey and just lending your insight. I've learned so much, and I really am, going to take some of these concepts and sort of think on them a little while, because that's how I process a little slower than the computers that you're used to, and I like to think about things a little bit.
Well, you're in finance. This makes perfect sense. Of course.
Yeah.
Most people do. Yes.
Yeah. But I just love some of the concepts that we've talked about, and kind of that idea that you have intrinsic worth, that you really are authentically who you are, there's no one else like you. I'm going to think on that a little bit, Irene.
Oh, yes. Well, you should, because it's absolutely the truth. I have full confidence in this. It's been lovely chatting. I absolutely loved this. It was really fun.
Thank you. Thank you for doing it. If I have a young lady who wants to get with you and ask some questions, how does she do that?
Absolutely. My email, just shoot me an email, on LinkedIn. That's also a great place to get a hold of me. Absolutely. I'm always happy to talk with people, especially younger women coming into the world and navigating all this weird stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always happy to chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I do too. I really loved it. Thank you so much, Lorie.